Thank you for your patience and welcome to the What is Lean Thinking and Can It Really Help to Improve Patient Care webinar, which is presented today by Christine Bryant, who works for NHS Elect. We have a couple of housekeeping points. First of all, just to know that the session is being recorded and the recording will be available on your relevant website shortly. All of the attendees are muted to avoid background noise during the recording. And at the end of the presentation, there'll be an opportunity to ask Chris questions. If you have a question, please use the raise your hand option in the panel on the right-hand side of your screen, or alternatively, you can write your question in the question section on the panel. During the Q&A sections, we'll unmute you so you can ask your question in person. I thank you all for waiting, and I'll now hand you over to Chris. Thank you, Chris.
Okay, thank you. Okay, hello everybody. Thank you for waiting. It's really kind of you to give up your busy day to come along and have a listen. I hope you're going to find this session interesting. I have a long association with applying lean thinking in acute settings, and I hope that I can share some of that experience with you today. Just so that you have a little bit of an idea about who's actually talking to you today, I am actually a nurse by background, and my history is long and varied. I've been very involved in senior nursing roles, operational roles. I've also done lots of service improvement type roles as well. So, and in pretty much really for the last 20 years or so, I've very much used a kind of a lean thinking philosophy to underpin pretty much most of what I do. So, okay, so onward and upward then. Okay, so a little bit about lean thinking really. Lean thinking it is a kind of a term really that was coined by an MIT graduate a long time ago who was actually helping some authors, some researchers do some work for a book called The Machine That Changed the World. The book was written by Womack, Jones and Roos. Some of you may be familiar with that work. But he really kind of went and looked at the way that these places worked and literally coined that phrase really. So to his way of thinking, it was a very lean way of working. The book was based on a 5-year study of the automotive industry in Japan, and at the time Toyota was really beginning, and probably in terms of, when I say beginning, they were really beginning to be noticed in terms of the work that they were doing and the fact that their output was so considerable and their quality was really becoming recognized in terms of quality and productivity. You know, they were just really highly regarded, which is why obviously Womack, Jones and Roos went to go and have a look to see what was happening over there. And by the way, this student actually went on to become the CEO of Hyundai. So how did it all start then? Well, at the end of the Second World War, Japan really was looking around for things that they could do because obviously their economy was shattered somewhat. And they thought that actually one of the things that they probably would be quite good at was manufacturing, and they thought that they could be pretty good at manufacturing cars. So they sent a guy called Taiichi Ohno over to America because at that point Ford was the #1 car producer in the world. Ford just literally flooded the whole market, and everyone looked at Ford as being, you know, the place to go. Anyway, he went there and he had a look, and he realized very quickly that actually there was no way that they could match the way that the Americans worked, the way that they approached what they were doing. So he came back thinking, well, yeah, I think we can do this, but we're going to have to think very differently about the way that we do it. So probably most of you will be familiar with this, but I always think it just reminds us that sometimes you really do have to think very differently. I hope that you can hopefully figure out, for those of you who are not familiar with this, that actually says lift if you change your thinking around. And likewise, lots of people think that these are two different sizes down the middle. In fact, they're not. They're the same. So at that point, people worked very much in terms of working and planning their work in functions and departments, and grouping activities by type and performing activities in batches. And that was certainly the experience that the man from Toyota saw when he went over to Japan. And the way it kind of worked over there was basically, you know, they in America, they literally would be making a car and they would make 100 bonnets, 100 wings, 100 boot covers. And there would be a man at the end of the conveyor belt, and he would decide whether they were up to quality or not. But if he missed something, of course, then those things would carry on through the line, and eventually they would make a car. And then, of course, what happened was actually you might get to the end of that entire process and find that you've missed a fault, and in fact you've got 100 cars that are actually no good. And that obviously wasn't going to work for the Japanese, because not only could they not afford the raw materials in the first place, they couldn't afford to make the cars only to have them wasted. So it was just a no-go for them. But that's kind of a sort of a thinking and a philosophy that we carry on even in the healthcare sector, in as much as we like to focus things in functions and departments and batches, which is not an experience that is pleasant for those people who sit at the end of that. What it does mean, you know, if the big hairy managers come around, then we've got departments that look really busy and the staff are very occupied, and the equipment has all got a very high utilisation, but it's not necessarily helpful if you're sitting in the middle of all of that. So it kind of needed to require, as I say, a very different way of thinking. And their way of thinking was to actually say, well, actually, what can we do to remove all of that waste? And how would we do that? Well, how about we stop and we think about what we do. Every time something goes wrong, we really stop and think about actually what's wrong with it and how can we fix it. When you're making cars, that's a very easy thing to do, because actually, if you're working on a conveyor belt, you can actually stop and you can actually think, right, okay, stop the line, this is broken, this is not working, and we'll try and rectify that. It's not always as easy for us to do that in health, but what we can do is say, actually, no, it is broken. We've got to make some time to actually think about how we can fix this. And what the Toyota experience was, and what our experience has been in health, is actually, if you take the time to do that, you can remove an awful lot of wasted effort, and life gets a lot easier. And the really great thing, I think, for me, has been the impact, watching the impact that it has on the staff who work in some of these broken systems. Because actually, if you're continually working in a broken system, it becomes very wearing on your morale, on your well-being, and it becomes very hard work. If every day you go to work and it's a real trudge, it's soul destroying, really. And the great thing about taking root cause analysis and fixing what is going wrong on a regular basis means that actually you're not continually working in those broken systems. So lots of folks think that, you know, lean means that you're going to go in and you're going to do a massive management restructure, you know, and people are going to get made redundant, and lean is mean, and you hear all sorts of strange things associated with it. But it's not. It's just a very sound business logic. It's now got a very long history. This has been going, as I say, since the end of the Second World War. The whole philosophy is focused on eliminating waste, enhancing value from the product, or in our case, the patient's point of view. So it's looking at the process that the patient goes through and thinking to yourself, well, actually, is what I'm doing for this patient actually adding value, or am I making life painful and difficult for them? in terms of the systems and processes that you have to go through. So it's not about optimizing the activities of individual organizations or assets or associated technology. It's about looking at the person and what can we do to make things easier. This is not easy stuff to do, because if you do make an error and you need to stop and you need to analyze what went wrong and you want to put it right, that's not always easy, particularly when you're in a very, very busy environment. And I've had some extremely busy operational jobs, and I know how tough that is to do. But actually, it is worth it, because if you get it right, then it just makes life so much easier tomorrow. So as I've said then, it's really a philosophy, it's a way of thinking, it's a way of approaching what we do. There are some tools, and I will share some of those tools with you shortly. It does depend, the success of it does depend on having a really good supportive management infrastructure and information to help you manage your service on a daily basis. But it's very much about having people who understand the philosophy of Lean and who have the right mindset. So people who focus on not what is good for the organisation, but actually what is good for the patient, what is good for the patients who are working through our system. How can we improve the value chain for them so that they are the first thing we think about and not the last thing we think about. Okay, so the 5 principles really is to think about, okay, specify value from the standpoint of the patient. So we've all answered lots and lots of queries and questions from patients, and one of the biggest things is, why did I have to wait? What was going on? What was I waiting for? I was in there for ages and nothing seemed to happen. So actually, what is important, and it's important to actually work with the patients as well as the staff to say, actually, what is it that is of value to you? What matters to you? What can we do? How can we make the system work better for you? And we know that wherever we do that successfully, not only do we have much happier patients and staff, but actually we end up with a much more efficient service. So the quality becomes better. Identifying the whole value stream for every patient that goes through. So not just looking at it in bite-sized pieces, but to look at the whole system. So if you have a patient going through A&E, look at that process from the beginning, at the very start of their journey, right the way through. Because often you'll find that you might have individual departments that work extremely well in their own small environment, but actually when you actually hand between one department and the next department, so when you hand from the ward to maybe the patient has to go to X-ray, the patient comes back from X-ray and then comes back there, that has to go to A&E or another diagnostic. It's those bits in between that often cause big problems and actually mean that the journey is interrupted, and it's often the bit where patients actually get very frustrated. It's about making the patient journey flow. So the next link in the chain should be looking to really pull the patient through. It's not about somebody standing in A&E trying to push patients through. We should be having our systems aligned so that we can actually pull. So there's a constant pull, and you're constantly, hopefully, managing to perfection. We'll never reach perfection, but it's something that we aspire to. So why does Lean work? Well, it allows us to see waste, because every time something goes wrong and you look at it, you examine it, you do your root cause analysis, you really start to understand where the waste is in the system. The other great thing it does is it actually makes responsibilities clear, because everybody becomes very clear about what their role is. I've looked after many staff over the years, and the times that I've heard people say, well, that's not my job, or actually, well, I didn't know I was supposed to do that. The great thing about Lean is, and pulling apart your systems and building them back together again with your patients where you can, is that it becomes very clear whose job belongs to who, and everybody understands what their role is. And of course, if you're not if you're not working in a broken system all the time, and if you're not wasting and getting things wrong all the time, it removes masses of unnecessary work because you're not having to redo that work all the time. You focus on the whole patient journey, as I said earlier. It's looking at the whole journey so that you make sure that you don't get those breaks in your flow between departments, between services. It solves problems at root cause because you're constantly looking and examining that. And you're measuring the right things. And the measurement is actually, people kind of groan when you say measurement, but actually measuring the right things should be a quick and easy thing to do, because what you're measuring is when you get it right because your performance improves, but when you get it wrong, you identify that really, really quickly, and then you can think about what corrective actions you need to take. And as I mentioned earlier, it removes a huge amount of frustration. So the way it works then, previously, if you like, in the old thinking, you know, something would go wrong, and you keep the wheels turning, you find a workaround, and the short-term effect of that is great because you maintain some output, but actually the long-term effect is you've now put workarounds into your system, which are extra things that you have to do. And actually that's not good because it will go wrong again in the future because it hasn't really been put right. And then what happens is somebody comes along and then they find another workaround. I've gone into systems where a very common place for that to happen is when somebody introduces a new software system into an organisation. And software systems are often not built with the end user in mind, or maybe there's not been enough communication in terms of what that needs to look like. So often the system doesn't really work the way that the person who's actually going to use it needs it to work. So they fiddle with it and they put in workarounds. And sometimes I've gone into an organisation to find there might be 10 workarounds for one simple process on the computer, and that's because people have gone in and put their own fixes into the system. So that's a huge problem. Of course, I say the more workarounds you have, the more things there are to go wrong, and the more things that will go wrong. So in Lean, what happens is something goes wrong, and you stop and you investigate it. And when you rebuild your system, you try and make sure that you make it as mistake-proof as possible. And the other thing that you do, and this is where the measurement comes into play, is you make sure you put some kind of monitor in place so that if it looks like it's going to go wrong again in the future, you can pick it up very quickly and fix it again very quickly, rather than having something go wrong over a long period of time. So the short-term effect is that you might actually reduce your output. You certainly would if you were in manufacturing, but even in our setting, you know, that might possibly be a problem. You might reduce some things a little bit, but actually it really is, as I can't stress this enough to you, it's harder, but it will lead to better quality and much happier staff. So think about what you do. We want everything that we do in our systems and processes to add value to the patient journey. It's going to cost time, it's going to cost money, and as long as it adds valuable, then it's valuable. If that's not the case, if you're wasting time, it's still going to cost you time, it's still going to cost you money, but it adds no value and it's waste. So those are the things that you need to pull out of the system. So Lean is all about the constancy of purpose and being persistent. It's not something that you can think, oh, this is a nice idea, we'll try this for 6 months. If you're going to do it, you've really got to be consistent and persistent about it, and you need to get those Lean mindsets and behaviours embedded within your organisation so that everybody is singing from the same hymn sheet, really. The other thing that personally I love about it is actually the people who design the systems and processes are not top-down managers. They're the people who actually do the job. And that's really important, because actually, if I walk into an organisation as a manager, I don't know how those people do those, how they manage their systems and processes. But the people that do it every day do. They know what's broken, and 9 times out of 10, they know exactly how to fix it. And that's really important, that we stop and spend time to listen to those folk who are actually doing it. I've done lots of improvement stuff in my career. And what's been the most interesting for me, sometimes when we do sort of nice kind of rapid improvement events and workshops and things, we make sure that everybody is involved. So, there'll be managers, nurses, doctors, there'll be healthcare assistants, porters, and honestly, half the time, most of the best ideas will be coming from the people who are absolutely on the ground doing the job. And it's very much, it has to be a very open and honest dialogue. People need to be allowed to speak and be free to speak. And if they think it's not working, to be able to be honest about that and say, well, I'm sorry, but this is not working. And say, well, okay, come on, give us some thoughts, give us some ideas. And lean managers tend to be coaches rather than managers. Okay, so benefits of lean thinking then. It's a focus on what's important to patients and clinicians. It certainly, eventually, you end up with much fewer mistakes, accidents and errors. You improve your productivity. You end up doing more with the same, but without the hassle, basically. You will eventually, it's not immediate, but you will eventually see, because you're improving your quality all the time, and because you're improving your quality and your efficiency and your productivity, you do end up with reduced costs. But as I say, it does take a little bit longer to do. You do deliver what you need to deliver, and you provide what's required just in time. One of the great things that we do is we often do too much of something too soon, but we'll talk about that a bit later on. But what happens is, of course, you build within your organisation this fantastic culture of improvement and constantly looking for improvement. Because if everybody feels free to speak, then that's exactly what they'll do. They will speak up because they'll know that somebody's actually listening to what they have to say. So that's a little bit about the philosophy behind lean thinking. I'm going to share with you now just a few tools that I personally have found quite useful throughout my career. I don't profess to be, a sort of a massive lean academic, but what I can tell you is that I've used this kind of lean thinking philosophy, and I've used many of the lean tools within that to help me improve services to the patients that I've been responsible for. So let's have a bit more of a look at what is waste. So we've already said it's anything that doesn't add value to the patient. So fundamentally, there are 7 wastes that we that we focus on. So the first waste is transport. Now, transport is about moving people or things unnecessarily, and it's something that we are particularly bad at in the NHS. If you think about the hundreds of discharge lounges up and down the country that are ferrying patients about, quite often, if you walk past a discharge lounge, you'll hear somebody say, "Oh, I've forgotten my Zimmer frame. Oh, I've forgotten my walking stick. Oh, I've forgotten this. I've forgotten that." And sometimes that doesn't just mean a trip back up to the ward to collect said item. It will often be that the driver's in a hurry and he'll say, "That's all right, I'll come back to that later." So that would be a perfect example of unnecessary transport. We're a lot better now than we used to be, because now we've got digital X-ray, so we're not ferrying X-rays about. But some of us are still, having to move around many packages of notes, etc., etc. So there's lots and lots of examples of wasted transport. The next one is inventory. And again, inventory is a huge problem. As I mentioned earlier, by profession, I'm a nurse, and like many of my colleagues, I confess that if a bank holiday is coming or a weekend, I'll just order that little bit extra just to be on the safe side. And often we can be guilty of holding too much inventory. And of course, the problem with that is, for a start, often you've got nowhere to store it because you've got too much stock. Then because you've got too much, it kind of gets bundled into the cupboard, and then what you have got can quite often go out of date, so then you have to throw it away because it's completely wasted. And then of course there's the problem of actually having to move it unnecessarily because it's in your way, etc., etc. I could go on and on. So inventory is a biggie. Okay. Motion, a lot of people get confused between motion and transport. Motion is really about the way your workplace is organised, and motion is a tricky one, and sometimes it's not always easy, particularly if you work in an old hospital, to try and locate your services as best as you possibly can. Sometimes that's tricky to do, but what we can do is make sure that with each area that we work in, that we try and make sure that that workplace is organised as efficiently as we possibly can. So one of the, probably one of the best examples I can give you is pharmacies are difficult places. You can imagine having all those drugs and having them all stored. And oftentimes, or in days gone by, oftentimes drugs were stored alphabetically. Well, when we're talking about storing things in Lean, we talk about actually how do we need to set this storeroom up. And we talk about having runners, the things that you use all the time, repeaters, the things that you use quite often, and strangers, the things that you hardly ever use. So you need to have them, but you need to put them at the back of the room rather than at the front of the room. So having things stored in the order in which you're most likely to use them is really helpful. I go to hospitals all over the place, and I can't tell you the times I go in and I'll see in an A&E resus room, for example, you know, I'll see cannula in one place, giving sets in another, and fluids in another, rather than having everything stored together. So setting up your workplace to work for you, rather than having to walk around it unnecessarily, is a really big one. I had an occasion fairly recently to go for a consultation myself, and I kid you not, the consultant who was doing my consultation must have gone out of that room 6-7 times because she didn't have what she needed in the room with her. Now that is a terrible waste of time, and not to mention which it didn't do my mental state any good, because I was thinking, well, this place is not very well organised. There's nothing in here for this poor person to use. So motion's a biggie. Waiting, making people or things wait. We all try really hard to not let this happen, and it's a constant battle because we've got big numbers of people coming through the door. But if we make things or people wait, what happens is we create batches, and batches are really difficult to cope with and to deal with. So if you can find ways to make your system flow without having big queues or making things wait, then things become much easier to manage. So it's trying to find ways to reduce variation that cause those big waiting periods, big waiting queues. It's going to take considerably longer. So if you do something, if you create too much of something, you create a batch, which then means that you've got something waiting. And then the poor person at the end of that batch kind of gets drowned because they've suddenly got a huge clump of something to do, a huge big batch to deal with. If you, as I say, if you can try and remove the variation so you just don't get those big highs and dips in your system, it will make life much easier for the person coming behind you, the next link in the chain, so to speak. Oh, we're good at this. Okay, over-processing is all about unnecessary processing or duplication. And we are really bad at this. And it's one of the big criticisms that we have from patients and their carers. They get really irritated when we keep asking them the same questions. And we do it because we want to be safe, but we have to find better ways to do it so that we're not asking the same things over and over and over again. We're also really good at creating unnecessary amounts of paperwork or administration. Again, in my improvement roles, I've been to organisations that might be running a bookings system, for example, and those poor administration staff will record things in diaries, on Excel spreadsheets, software systems, and their own lists. So they're doing 4 lots of work when actually they just need to put it on the software system. And as long as you've got a good software system with a good backup system, should your software or your IT go down, actually that's absolutely fine. A great place where they often do that is in operating theatres. There are lots of operating theatres that still have an operating book, a diary. It gets written in the notes, in the nursing notes, the medical notes, and there might be another set of notes as well. So there's just huge amounts of unnecessary processing that if we're smart, we can actually do it. We have to be safe. Of course, we have to be safe, but we just have to be a little bit smarter as well. And finally, the 7th waste is defects. So if you have a defect, then obviously you've got the cost of not getting it right in the first place, and then you've got to do it again. So you end up with double the cost, really. So defects is an issue. Not to mention which, of course, you know, we can actually do something that is risk or life-threatening if we don't get it right. So process thinking. Process thinking is very big in the lean world. And really what it's about is actually if you can reduce journey time by taking out unnecessary waste, you can actually double your productivity, which of course ultimately will reduce your costs. Okay, so in process thinking, it's all about, the emphasis is very much on reducing time rather than reducing cost. And the way to reduce time, of course, is to make sure that everything you do works the first time, every time. So you're removing mistakes and waste from the system and improving the quality constantly. So focusing on those end-to-end processes, not individual steps. And it's really, as I said earlier, right at the beginning, really, it's moving away from that sort of departmental efficiency to improving the overall process efficiency. Okay, so if you're going to look at an entire process, where do you start, really? So what we say is really each operation differs in 2 key respects. So there's volume and variety. I'll explain that a little bit more. So if you have a look at this little diagram, you need to think about what process are these. So if I just bring this on here. So if for example, we went to a small local cafe, it can't do the huge numbers, but what it would do is they probably would be able to make me what I wanted pretty much the way I wanted it. If I go to McDonald's, I know exactly what I'm going to get. It deals with thousands of covers every day or takeaways, but actually the selection is small. And even though when you see the adverts, they're bringing out new this, new that, new the other, they might be bringing out something new, but they've removed the thing that was there before it. So the selection is very limited. Likewise, a taxi can take me anywhere I want to go, but very small numbers, whereas a train takes many hundreds of people, but only to certain destinations. So it's thinking about actually where do I need to start. And what we tend to say is focus on the high volume, low variety systems in your processes within your system. So in health terms, if you think about the systems that a patient goes through, every patient, whether they come into minors, no matter where they come into the hospital, everybody has to go through a system assessment. They need to they might have to have some investigations, they might need to have some treatment, but the assessment is the same, the investigations are pretty broad brush going to be the same, the treatments obviously will be different, the admission process would be the same, the going to theatre would be the same, the discharge processes are likely to be broadly similar. So rather than having different forms for assessments and different forms for investigations and different ways to access treatment, try to standardize as many of those processes as you possibly can. Because if you can do that, not only do you make life a lot easier for everyone, but actually it makes it much more understandable. So if I'm a new nurse coming into your organisation, I only have to learn where to find the paperwork for assessment. I pretty much know where I'm going to find it, and I know what it's going to look like. Equally, if I go to work in outpatients, I might, the same thing applies. I'll know exactly what the forms look like that I need for investigations. So trying to standardise as much of your administration as you possibly can. It's those supporting systems and processes that will actually help with your patient flow. It will help the system move much more slowly. Another of the tools within Lean, and this is probably the one that kind of gets the most press actually, is something called 5S. And 5S is looking at we talked about workplace organisation just now. 5S is about sorting out and simplifying and sustaining your workplace, or it might be your stock, or it doesn't matter what it is really, but it's really a case of simplifying it, cleaning it, making it easy to get in and out of, standardizing what you do, sustaining what you do, and keep sorting it. And all of that, if you do that, it will really help you manage your departments really well. So in terms of sorting, determine what is needed and remove the rest. I mean, as I say, we're really bad at being little hamsters and keeping everything. Organise everything so that everything has a place and everything is in its place. Don't allow mess to accumulate. Systemize, make standards obvious and maintain them. And sustain them by making sure that everybody understands what those high standards are, and making sure that those standards are adhered to, because we're very good at making them working. That was a bit painful. Ordering stock was extremely difficult because they couldn't find what it was they needed it. Finding it was almost impossible. There were masses of excess stock levels, and of course the cost of holding all that stock was just a bit crazy really. Hang on, let me just go back, sorry. One of the other things that we found in this room was there was lots of equipment that actually wasn't being used anymore. And people see expensive pieces of equipment and they're frightened to throw it away. But the reality is, if you haven't used it for a year, put it in quarantine. And if you still haven't used it for another 6 months, it is highly unlikely you will ever use it again. So, you just need to just really investigate, will you ever use it again? If not, get it written off the asset register and just remove it. One of the issues in that room that you saw was that they were carrying far too much stock. So we work with them to develop something called a two-bin system. It's not rocket science. What you were looking at there are two bins, one on top of the other. They're oxygen masks. They've got exactly the same amount in each basket. And in each of those baskets is enough stock, because it's been calculated on previous usage, is enough stock for 3 days. So in those two bins, you've got enough stock for 6 days. So you literally, once you finish the top box, you put it in a quarantine area. The stores people come along and they just barcode it, order it again, and then it comes back and it gets topped up. But in that way, you never carry more stock than you need to. And it's quite easy to work out how often do you have a delivery and how much stock do you use in between those deliveries, and then place your stock on the shelves accordingly. Huge stock return. So you can see here that this is the same department with the two-bin system in place, and it's looking a lot neater and tidier. And the same room again. So now everything is clearly labelled, it's clearly marked. All of those shelves, you can't see it, but all of those shelves are marked with exactly what needs to be on the shelf, so that there's no over-ordering. Okay, we talked about motion being one of the wastes. This is, again, a piece of work that I was involved with previously. This is a path lab, and you can see that the way that the samples came in originally, the poor old samples kind of went all around the world 10 times before they actually got to be treated and analysed and reported on. And what we did here was we really helped them to think about how they might design the room differently. We reduced the motion time, and it was actually 75% less with the new positioning. So that's quite significant and a lot easier on the legs, let me tell you. They were very grateful when they were allowed to think about doing this differently and altering their room accordingly. Another thing, not massively helpful in health, but can be for places like pathology or pharmacy. This is about tack time, and it just means basically calculating how long your process takes so that you can work out exactly how long your processes need to take. Okay. This is another piece of work. This is a piece of work where there were problems with a theatre in actually getting instruments in and out of the department. Sorry, this is pathology. This is looking at the number of requests that go through the laboratory on time. And this is my point about the measuring, really. You really need to look at the measures when your activity is happening. And if you can, do it by the hour, because it will help you think about how you plan your staffing, how you plan the use of your equipment, etc., etc. Okay, so rapid improvement events. Rapid improvement events, if you have the luxury to run them over 5 days, then that is fantastic, and that would always be the way that most people would want to do them. But really, it doesn't matter. You can do it in a day. Basically, what it means is that you bring together the people who do the job. You know that you've got an issue, so you know exactly what you want to examine. So you bring together the people who actually do the job on a daily basis. Management really need to give some dedicated time to those people so that they've got time to work on the issue. But bringing people together and actually giving them an opportunity to sit in a room and look at the issue and the problems that they might be dealing with, it really helps to challenge them to think outside of their comfort zone in a nice, safe environment. And if you've got somebody that can facilitate the process, all the better. Really important to not just map a process, and I'm sure you're all familiar now with mapping processes, but actually going out, if you can, and walking the process. So don't just sort of think you know what the process is and sticking it on the wall with some post-its, but actually going out and challenging those thoughts by walking the process and actually seeing it live. You can't beat it, because what you think happens and what actually happens are often two entirely different things. as we've mentioned many times during this presentation, root cause problem solving is the key. That is the whole philosophy behind Lean. If it's broken, then you need to stop and find out why it's broken, and then redesign it in a way that will work. And be creative about it. Don't think that you've got to find a really quick and easy way, because you'll end up with a workaround rather than actually something that's going to be future-proofed. Data collection is really important to validate any kind of anecdote, and that is really key. I did a piece of work with ITU on another topic, and the piece of work was all about how could we facilitate the movement of fit patients from ITU to their home ward a bit earlier in the day. And we were doing this piece of work, and one of the sisters was absolutely adamant that they couldn't move the patient off the ward early in the morning because the wards were never ready to receive the patient. So we kind of took a break and we said, okay, well, let's do some data collection. Let's see actually how often that happens. So she actually did the audit. She monitored the position for 3 weeks. And in that 3 weeks, and it was a busy period, not once did that happen. She never once had the problem of not being able to get the ward to receive the patient. And the wards didn't know that she was doing that audit. She was very honest about it. And she said, do you know what? She said, I thought that was a real problem. And she said, it clearly isn't. And often something can go badly wrong one day, and then you think it's something that always happens. But in fact, it's not. It just gets blown out of all proportion sometimes. You need to generate ideas and prioritise solutions, obviously, as part of, and it gives you a real opportunity to do that if you can get time away from the front line. And test, just to do small tests of change and implement those and see what the position is. So, you can do that plan, do, study, act, your PDSAs. Small tests of change are really, really important. And it might just be one system, one process, one patient, but those small tests, and lots of them, will grow and build to provide some big changes ultimately. This is an example of a process map, very scientific, as you can see, on brown paper with post-its, but it works. So what you can see here is this yellow line are people sat in the room and they said, this is our process and this is how it works. We then went and walked the process, and actually what you saw was that all of those mauve post-its are actually all the variations to the system that they thought that they were running. So all of those purple post-its are actually issues and problems that needed to be sorted out. And that was just from one walk around. So data collection, as we said, very, very important. This was theatre, so this is instruments out of the CSSD, out of theatre and into the CSSD wash. You can see that we've got a big peak in sort of around about 2 o'clock. And when we did the data collection, what we found was that we had 2 theatre porters collecting the goods from theatre. They were all arriving in SSD in one big clump, so we've got things waiting, and we've got a batch, which we've already said is bad. And what we discovered was that we had 2 theatre porters, and guess what? They both went to lunch at the same time. So they left the stuff waiting until kind of lunchtime, then they went to lunch, then they came back and then took everything to CSSD. So you can see the poor people in CSSD were tearing their hair out. Okay. As I said, prioritising your issues is a really good. So again, you need to think about when you're prioritising, because when you do a rapid improvement event or in a workshop, whatever you want to call it, you will find that you have lots of issues. Try and theme them as much as you can, so that you kind of break down your themes into bite-sized pieces, and attack the systems and processes that will have the biggest impact, but will be the easiest to do. If you focus on those big volume items that are easy to do, those difficult things that have the less impact can wait, And actually, the things that are more complex to sort out, you will have more time to do later on. That would be my absolute top tip. So do big volume stuff, easy stuff, quick. The other thing, of course, is that gives you is that from a morale point of view, the staff feel fantastic because they feel like they're making a big impact really quickly. And there you go. There's just you'll get these slides later, so you can you'll be able to see and use that. This is an action plan, again, highly scientific. In this case, we just put it on a big piece of brown paper. But what you can't see probably, or you might be able to see actually, is that this is a week-by-week action plan. And the staff put this together, the staff who were involved in the Rapid Improvement event, and they literally, each week, they work through this action plan. And if they got halfway through, or the issue was half sorted, they put one line through the post-it, and once it was completed, they put 2 lines through the post-it, and that was it done. And again, that was a really, really visual way of them understanding that they were making progress, and they were achieving what they'd set out to achieve. And they gave themselves, you can't see the rest of this, but I think they gave themselves 6 weeks to complete this action plan, which they did. In fact, they finished it before the end of the 6 weeks. So the success factors of rapid improvement events is it's involving staff who know the process inside out. The willingness, and it's really important that you've got clinicians who are really willing to participate in the process, because you do need some clinical champions. Managerial staff who are able and supportive of implementing new ways of working. What you also will find is that the more you fix, the greater the capability you build within your organisation, because people then start to think about waste removal constantly. I can't even go into a shop now without thinking, oh, that's a waste, that's not very efficient the way that they've done that, because it becomes ingrained into your thinking. Also you can align it with your overall trust strategy. Making sure that you measure what you do will help you sustain changes, because if you constantly monitor the changes that you put in place, if they start to slip, then you can go back in and implement corrective actions very, very promptly. Management who understand and support the lean thinking philosophy. So things to look for, you'll see that people start to do improvement work without being asked. They'll just kind of start to do it. You'll end up with a very flexible, widely skilled workforce. Your transport and motion will be cut to a minimum. Your mistakes should become a lot less. And as I say, if you will detect failure very, very quickly, and you become much more responsive to demand. Okay, so I think I've probably said all of that really, except to say that you can apply that kind of lean thinking philosophy in everything you do, and it doesn't matter what area you work in, whether at home or at work. Actually, you can apply that thinking. Start small, and just take it from there. Really, don't try and eat an elephant all in one go, but small tests of change will be the way to go. Okay, I'm going to hand back to you now, Lisa.
Brilliant, thanks, Chris. Has anybody got any questions for Chris? You can raise your hand and I will unmute you so you can ask Chris your question in person. Or alternatively, if you write your question in the question box. I did have a question earlier, which was around sending out the slides. Just to say that the webinar is recorded, and the slides and the recording will go up on whichever of your programs you're on your websites, with probably within the next 2 or 3 days. If you need them any earlier, then please just email your mailbox, for example, frailty@nhselect.org.uk or AEC or ESIC, and we'll be able to get the slides for you and send them to you sooner. I don't think anybody has any questions, Chris.
Okay.
No, not getting any coming through. But
Okay.
thank you for your time. It's very much appreciated. As I've said, recording and presentation will be available on your websites. If there aren't any more questions, then... Oh, yes, sorry, just got one question, and it's from Stephanie. I'll just unmute you, Stephanie. Hi, Stephanie.
Hello.
Hello.
Sorry, it's Stephanie and Randy from Worcester. We just wanted to know if they're going to be more sessions on lean.
If there are going to be any more sessions on lean, I can't answer that question. I'm sure there will be, but I'm afraid I'm not able to answer that question.
Thank you.
Do you mean webinars, Stephanie?
Yeah.
Yeah. If there's a demand, then I'm sure Chris will happily do another one, perhaps later on in the year.
Thank you.
Okay.
Is it something that you think your organisation might be interested in, Stephanie?
Yes, sorry, it's Randeep and Stephanie. Yes, we would be
right,
interested.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, yeah. It's highly likely. I have run this session. I've done quite a few webinars on this particular topic. So yeah, it's likely, but I couldn't tell you when that might happen.
Okay, it was very helpful. Thank you very much for it.
Okay.
Thank you. Let's just have another look. Okay, there don't seem to be any more questions, Chris.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Well, I hope people have enjoyed that. It's not easy talking to a computer, as I'm sure everyone appreciates. But anyway, I hope you've managed to find something useful in that presentation.
Okay. Thank you everyone for logging in, and as I say, it'll be on the website within the next few days. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.